I woke up that morning with a strange mixture of hope and nausea swirling inside me, the kind that comes when your entire future is balanced on a single conversation. For weeks, I had been preparing for this job interview, holding on to it like a lifeline while everything else in my life felt unpredictable and fragile. I had rewritten my resume more times than I could count, practiced answers in the mirror until my voice cracked, and rearranged my tiny room into something that resembled professionalism. The position meant stability, a steady paycheck, and perhaps most importantly, a chance to finally step out from under the suffocating shadow of my parents' opinions. As I brewed my coffee, I kept reminding myself that this was my day, my chance, my moment to prove I was capable of more than anyone in this house believed. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything, but first, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. By the time I powered on my laptop and logged into the Zoom waiting room, my palms were already damp with nerves. I wiped them on my sweats and reminded myself that preparation mattered more than fear. The hiring manager appeared on my screen a few minutes later, her smile warm, her voice steady and welcoming. That alone eased the tension gripping my chest. She asked about my past experiences, my goals, my strengths, and I answered with a confidence I didn't know I still possessed. Each response came smoother than the last, and for the first time in months, I felt something fierce and unfamiliar flickering inside me: pride. With every nod she gave me, with every follow-up question that suggested genuine interest, a small part of me dared to imagine a different life than the one I had always known. The interview was going so well that I almost forgot where I was, almost forgot who else lived in this house, almost forgot that my parents never respected my boundaries, not emotional, physical, or otherwise. As the hiring manager shifted into discussing the company's values and future plans, I straightened a little in my chair, preparing to respond with the blend of enthusiasm and clarity I had practiced a dozen times. Then suddenly her eyes drifted away from the camera, not in confusion or distraction, but in a way that made every cell in my body tighten. I recognized that look. It was the expression people wore when they saw something unexpected unfolding behind you. Something you couldn't see yet. Something that made them hesitate mid-sentence. A chill ran across my skin as I heard footsteps behind me, soft but unmistakably deliberate. Before I could turn around, my mother's voice floated into the room with the casual cheerfulness of someone entering a family gathering instead of a formal job interview. "Oh, you're on Zoom right now?" she said, as if she hadn't heard me explicitly state that I needed privacy for an interview. Then, to my horror, she leaned into the camera view, waving with an exaggerated smile. "Hi there. I'm her mother. Sorry to interrupt." My heart plummeted straight into my stomach. The hiring manager blinked in surprise, her polite smile frozen in place. Before I could mute myself, turn off my camera, or even form a coherent sentence, my father appeared beside my mother, squinting at the screen as if inspecting a product. "Is this the job interview?" he asked loudly, completely unconcerned with the panic rising inside me. I tried to say, "Please leave," but my voice caught in my throat. And then, as if destroying my credibility wasn't enough, my father leaned closer and said the sentence that shattered every ounce of progress I had made. "Look, we've been telling her, she's too mentally unstable for full-time work. She doesn't handle stress well. You should know that before you hire her." The words slammed into me like physical blows. My body locked up, my breath evaporated, and humiliation spread through me so violently that I felt dizzy. My mother nodded and added casually, "She has emotional issues. She gets overwhelmed easily. We're only trying to help. We don't want you to get the wrong impression." The hiring manager's expression shifted, not to judgment but something far worse: concern. The kind of concern that could cost me the job before I even finished my sentence. If she doubted my stability even for a moment, it was over. My thoughts spiraled, desperate and chaotic, as I stood frozen in front of the camera. I had no idea how long I sat there, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to pull myself out of the shock of such a betrayal. Everything I had worked for, everything I had prepared, everything I had dared to hope for, was being dismantled right in front of me by the two people who were supposed to protect me. I finally found my voice, stammering, "I'm so sorry, they weren't supposed to, please excuse, this isn't." But the damage was already done and I knew it. Still, the hiring manager surprised me. She didn't abruptly end the call. She didn't close the window or avoid eye contact. Instead, she took a slow breath and said, "Why don't we pause for a moment? You can take your time." Her tone was kind, understanding in a way that made my throat tighten. But even kindness couldn't erase the humiliation burning through my chest. I turned off my camera with trembling hands and stepped away from the desk, tears already stinging my eyes as my parents continued talking behind me like nothing catastrophic had just occurred. When I returned to the screen a moment later, trying to breathe through the shaking, the hiring manager was no longer alone in the Zoom room. Another small square had appeared. Someone else had joined the call. Someone whose camera was off, whose name was unfamiliar, whose presence made the hiring manager straighten slightly. And in that moment, though I didn't know who they were or why they were there, my instincts told me that the call had changed. Something unexpected was unfolding. And for the first time since my parents crashed the interview, I didn't feel completely powerless. When the new participant's name appeared in the Zoom window, I felt my breath catch again. Not from fear this time, but from a strange kind of anticipation I couldn't immediately decipher. The hiring manager glanced briefly toward the new square, giving a small nod of acknowledgement that told me their presence wasn't an accident. My parents had finally left the room, still talking loudly in the hallway about whether they should order takeout for dinner, completely oblivious to the destruction they had unleashed on my future. I turned my camera back on, wiping the last streak of tears from my face, my voice barely steady as I apologized again for the interruption. But the hiring manager didn't look frustrated or impatient. She looked thoughtful, almost cautious, as if she was weighing her next words very carefully. "I'd like to reintroduce someone to the call," she said gently. "This is our regional director, Ms. Alvarez. She was already scheduled to observe part of our interview process today." My heart dropped. Not because a regional director was present. That alone was intimidating. But because I realized that everything my parents had said, every humiliating sentence, every personal detail I never wanted revealed, had been witnessed by someone far higher up than I expected. My stomach twisted painfully as the director unmuted herself. Her camera flicked on, revealing a composed woman with sharp eyes softened by empathy. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she studied me with the kind of gaze that sees beyond the moment, beyond the chaos, beyond the surface. "I heard what happened," she said finally, her voice steady but warm. "All of it. And I think we should talk about what that means moving forward. Not for the sake of the interview, but for your well-being." Her words didn't feel intrusive. They felt like someone finally noticing a wound I'd been hiding for too long. But at the same time, shame washed over me again, thick and suffocating. I didn't want to discuss my parents. I didn't want to be pitted. I didn't want to be seen as fragile or unstable or anything close to what my parents had just painted me to be. I wanted to be evaluated for my skills, my experience, and the person I had worked so hard to become. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't prepared for. It was one thing to deal with my parents' constant undermining in private. It was another to have their words broadcast during one of the most important opportunities of my life. The director seemed to sense this because she leaned forward slightly and said, "Let me be clear. What they said is not a reflection of your capability." That sentence alone loosened something inside me I didn't realize I'd been clenching. The hiring manager nodded along, her expression softening even further. "We know these situations can be complicated," she added. "There's no judgment here." But judgment wasn't what I feared. It was loss. Loss of the opportunity, loss of my credibility, loss of the fragile hope I'd been holding on to. I inhaled shakily and said, "They weren't supposed to come in. I told them I needed privacy. They don't respect boundaries." My voice cracked halfway through. I hated that it did. I hated that the vulnerability I tried so hard to hide was now visible to two professionals who were supposed to assess my strength. But instead of reacting with discomfort or impatience, the director nodded slowly as if I'd confirmed something she already suspected. "You're allowed to set boundaries," she said quietly. "And you're allowed to want independence without being sabotaged by the people closest to you." Her choice of words, sabotaged, hit me harder than I expected. Because that was exactly what had happened. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. Sabotage. The truth of it sank into me like a stone dropping into deep water. For years, my parents had made comments about my competency, about my emotional resilience, about what I could or couldn't handle. But hearing them say it to an employer, hearing them voice it with such confidence, made me realize something painful. They didn't just doubt me. They needed me to fail because my success would invalidate the control they had always held over me. The director continued, "Here's what I'd like to do. I want you to take a breath, reset, and tell us, without interruption, about your experience and what you hope to achieve professionally. Your parents are not part of this story unless you choose to make them so." Her words steadied me in a way I couldn't fully explain. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaled slowly, and allowed the embarrassment to drain from my shoulders. If not fully, then enough to let me function. When I exhaled, I opened my eyes and began speaking again, this time with a voice that carried not just knowledge but determination. I talked about the projects I had led, the challenges I had overcome, the skills I had honed. I talked about my motivation for applying, my vision for growth, and the ways I believed I could contribute to the company. And as I spoke, something incredible happened. The two women listened. Not with skepticism. Not with pity. But with genuine engagement. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been chipped away slowly by years of being told I wasn't enough. When I finished, the director leaned back, nodding once with approval that felt almost unreal. "Thank you," she said simply. "That was strong, clear, and impressive." Relief spread through my chest in a warm wave, until my parents' voices echoed faintly in the hallway again, reminding me that my environment was still dangerous, still vulnerable, still not mine. The director's gaze flicked upward as if she heard them too. And then she said something I will never forget. "This isn't over, and you are not disqualified. In fact, this situation tells me more about your resilience than any resume ever could." For a moment, I didn't know whether to cry or breathe. They weren't dismissing me. They weren't penalizing me for my parents' cruelty. They were seeing me, not the chaos behind me, not the noise, not the shadows, but me. But even as relief filled my chest, another feeling crept in beneath it: anger. Not the sharp, explosive kind, but the kind that simmers quietly, forming a decision that changes everything. Because this wasn't just humiliation. This was the moment I realized something vital. If I got this job, I wouldn't just be earning a paycheck. I would be earning my freedom. When the director ended the call temporarily so they could review the next steps, I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the blank screen as though it still held the image of the two women who had just watched my entire world unravel and somehow still chose to believe in me. My parents' voices drifted faintly through the house again, carefree, oblivious, acting as if they hadn't detonated something precious inside me. I felt the embarrassment simmer beneath my ribs like a bruise I hadn't fully processed yet. But threaded through that humiliation was something else, something sharper. A rising determination that felt almost foreign after years of swallowing my anger. I wasn't sure if it came from the director's unexpected support or from the jarring realization that I needed to stop letting my parents shape the narrative of my abilities. My laptop chimed. The meeting resumed. I clicked join, my stomach twisting in knots as the Zoom window came back to life. But this time it didn't show just the hiring manager and the regional director. There was a third participant window, camera still off, microphone muted, name unfamiliar. But the atmosphere shifted the moment I saw it. The director smiled, but it wasn't the gentle, encouraging smile she had worn earlier. This one carried a hint of intention, the sort of expression people get when they know something you don't. The hiring manager adjusted in her seat too, almost as if she were straightening herself for someone of higher authority. My throat tightened. "Before we continue," the director began, "I want to introduce someone who has been observing the call from the start, as part of our leadership auditing protocol." That alone made my pulse spike. Someone had been there the whole time, from the moment I impressed them to the moment my parents barged in, to the moment my father said I was too unstable to be hired. My skin prickled with humiliation all over again, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now, not after everything. The director continued, her tone shifting into something far more formal. "This is Mr. Hendricks, our Chief People Officer. He oversees our hiring ethics, candidate experience, and employee well-being infrastructure." The title alone made my chest tighten. I had been emotionally exposed in front of one of the company's highest-ranking executives without even knowing he was present. A moment later his camera turned on. He appeared as a calm, middle-aged man with silver hair, warm eyes, and an expression that was not pitying but deeply observant, as though he could see more than what was on the screen. Thank you for coming back, he said gently. I know this has been a difficult experience. Difficult. That was one word for it. Traumatizing was another. I swallowed hard, nodding once. I appreciate the opportunity to continue, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't know anyone else was on the call. I know, he replied. And that's precisely why I stayed muted. I wanted to understand your natural approach, your communication style, your adaptability. He paused and his eyes softened. And what I witnessed was extraordinary resilience. I blinked, unsure I'd heard correctly. The hiring manager smiled, nodding in agreement. The director leaned slightly forward, her expression tightening with intention. What your parents said, she began slowly, and the way they intruded into your professional space. Frankly, it concerned us, but not for the reasons you might think. My hands trembled in my lap. Not because I was afraid, but because something was shifting. Something big. Mr. Hendricks continued. It concerned us because it was clear to all three of us that you've likely been carrying far more emotional weight than any young professional should be expected to carry, while still performing at a remarkable level. My breath caught. He wasn't doubting me. He was seeing me. He went on, calmly but firmly. You articulated your experience with clarity and honesty despite profound stress. You remained respectful even when your boundaries were violated. And you demonstrated emotional intelligence in how you recovered your composure. He nodded once. Many candidates fold under pressure. You adapted. My throat tightened again, but this time not from humiliation. The director added, if anything, your parents' intrusion revealed your strength, not your weakness. Her tone sharpened subtly. And let me be clear. Your personal information, especially unsupported claims made by third parties, does not factor into our hiring decisions. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I had expected to be dismissed the moment my parents walked into the frame, yet here they were reframing my worst moment into evidence of the very qualities they sought. But then something happened that shifted the entire direction of the conversation. Mr. Hendricks' tone changed, faintly but decisively. Before we proceed, he said, I need to ask, do you feel safe and supported in your current home environment? The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth instinctively to give the automatic reply, the one I'd been conditioned to give for years. Yes, it's fine. They just overstep sometimes. They mean well. But when I reached for those words, they felt heavy, false, suffocating. So instead, I told the truth, quietly, carefully, but honestly. I feel controlled, I said. Like my boundaries don't matter. Like they don't believe I'm capable of anything unless they approve of it. And when they don't approve, my voice caught. They undermine me. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was intentional. The kind of silence that comes when people are truly listening. Mr. Hendricks nodded slowly. Thank you for trusting us with that, he said. You didn't need to explain more than you were comfortable with, but your honesty helps us understand the context. The hiring manager leaned in. I want you to know something, she said gently. Many of us have seen similar situations. You're not alone in this. The director added, and this right here? This is why we observe interviews the way we do. Not to judge candidates, but to protect them. Something inside me shifted at that moment, something deep and quiet and overdue. Because for the first time in my life I felt like three someones, were standing on my side without hesitation. I wasn't being dismissed. I wasn't being pitted. I wasn't being questioned. I was being believed. Mr. Hendricks took a breath and then delivered the line that would change the entire trajectory of my life. We'd like to move you forward, not just as a candidate but as a priority candidate. My heart stopped. He continued, and I'd like to speak with you privately after this meeting about a potential support program we offer, as well as housing and relocation options for employees starting in difficult circumstances. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Housing, relocation, priority candidate? This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a door being opened, one I hadn't even known existed. And for the first time in years I felt something I hadn't dared to feel. Hope with teeth. Hope that could fight back. Hope that could free me. When the call ended and the Zoom window finally closed, I sat completely still in my chair, staring at the faint reflection of myself on the dark screen. My breathing was uneven, my heart beat loud against the silence of the room. I had walked into that interview expecting nothing more than a fair chance. Instead, I had walked out with something far bigger: validation, opportunity, and a lifeline disguised as a job offer still being finalized. But the shock hadn't settled yet, not fully. It lingered in my chest like a pulse of electricity, reminding me that my parents' sabotage hadn't succeeded. What stunned me most wasn't their cruelty. It was the fact that for the first time in years, someone outside this house had seen through it instantly. Someone had called it sabotage without hesitation. Someone had recognized the pattern I had tried to survive quietly. And they had responded with support, not suspicion. I wasn't prepared for what came next, though. Not emotionally. Not mentally. Because once the adrenaline faded, something else filled its place. A rising anger that felt like it had been waiting just under my skin for years. I stood from my chair slowly, every movement deliberate, every step feeling heavier than the last as I walked toward the hallway where my parents' voices carried. They were laughing. Loudly. Carelessly. As if the entire ordeal had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience for them. As if they hadn't just tried to destroy an opportunity one had poured weeks of preparation into. As if my humiliation were an acceptable price for them to maintain control. My mother noticed me first. She turned from the kitchen counter with a cheerful, clueless expression, one I had seen too many times, the look of a woman who believed deeply that she had done nothing wrong. "How did your little meeting go?" she asked, using the same dismissive tone she always used when referring to things important to me. "You got too emotional, didn't you? I told you to work on that." My father laughed, shaking his head. "She probably scared them off," he said, rolling his eyes. "Good thing we stepped in to give them the truth before they made a mistake." Something inside me snapped, not violently but quietly, like a rope reaching the final strand before breaking clean through. "You embarrassed me," I said, my voice low but steady. They both stopped. My father frowned, confused by the calmness instead of shouting. My mother tilted her head slightly as if I had spoken a foreign language. "Excuse me," she asked. "We were helping you. You always ruin things when we aren't around to keep you in line." I took a slow breath, the tremble in my hands fading as resolve replaced it. "You didn't help me," I said. "You humiliated me. You told complete strangers I couldn't handle life. You walked into my interview without permission and made statements about me that aren't true." My father scoffed. "Oh, here we go. Playing the victim again." My mother crossed her arms. "You should be grateful we care enough to intervene." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny but because the clarity of the moment felt surreal. For so long their control had been subtle, wrapped in the language of concern, responsibility, and guidance. But today the mask had slipped entirely. Today they had exposed themselves in front of witnesses, professional, respected witnesses, who didn't buy a word of it. And now I didn't either. "You didn't intervene," I said softly. "You sabotaged me. You always have." The silence that followed was sharp, stretching across the house like a drawn wire. My father's face darkened, recognizing, if only for a second, that the version of me he could manipulate was no longer standing in front of him. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, though his voice cracked faintly. "We've supported you. We've taken care of you. You wouldn't survive a week without us." And that was the moment I realized exactly why they wanted me to fail. Because failure kept me here. Failure kept me dependent. Failure kept me controllable. But I wasn't failing. Not anymore. I stood straighter. "They didn't reject me," I said plainly. Both of them stiffened. "In fact, they want to move me forward. They saw what you did and recognized it for what it was. They even want to help me relocate so I can have a healthy environment while working." My mother's eyes widened, not with concern but fear. Real fear. The kind people feel when their grip on something begins to slip. "Relocate," she repeated. "What do you mean relocate?" My father stepped forward, pointing a finger at me sharply. "You're not going anywhere. You think you can just pack up and leave? You're not ready for that." The calmness that washed over me then was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't anger. It was the quiet certainty of a person stepping into their own life for the first time. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." They stared at me, shocked, offended, and suddenly deeply aware that the power dynamic had shifted in a direction they never prepared for. And just as they opened their mouths to protest again, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was an email notification. Subject: Interview update. Next steps plus candidate support options. My future wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was real. It was happening. And the message was clear. I didn't need them to stand in front of me. I didn't need them to speak for me. I didn't need them to approve of me. I only needed one thing. A chance. And someone had finally given it to me. When I opened the email, the glow of the screen lit up my whole room, but something deeper inside me felt illuminated too. Something that had been dimmed, pushed down, or outright smothered for so long that I almost didn't recognize it. The subject line alone made my breath catch, because it symbolized something my parents had spent years convincing me I would never achieve: progress. Real, undeniable forward movement that didn't require their permission, approval, or supervision. My hands shook slightly as I tapped the message open, not from fear, but from the weight of everything this moment represented. The email wasn't cold or generic like most automated responses. It was personal, thoughtful, intentional. It thanked me for my resilience, acknowledged the unexpected interruption, and expressed pride in how I handled myself under pressure. Then it invited me to a final interview, and presented the relocation support they mentioned earlier, laid out in clean, professional bullet points that felt more like a rescue plan than an employment policy. I read the email once, then twice, then a third time, letting each sentence settle into me as gently and steadily as rainfall. My parents' voices were still echoing faintly down the hallway, but for the first time they sounded far away, like noise outside a closed window, irrelevant and incapable of reaching me. Every line of that email felt like someone had reached through the chaos of my life and pulled me toward something solid. Something stable. Something mine. I didn't realize tears were running down my face until one dropped onto the screen, blurring a word. But these tears weren't humiliation. They weren't frustration. They were something else. Relief mixed with a feeling I had almost forgotten how to access. Hope. A fragile, trembling, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, my story didn't end in this house. A moment later, my phone vibrated again, this time with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, professional-looking. I wiped my face with my sleeve, took a deep breath, and answered as steadily as I could. "Hello," I whispered. The voice on the other end was warm and calm, and even though he didn't introduce himself immediately, I recognized the tone before he said his name. "This is Mr. Hendricks," he said gently. "I wanted to speak with you directly if you're available." My chest tightened at the sound of his voice. Steady, grounding, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who saw more than the surface. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm here." He didn't begin with pleasantries. He didn't ask how I was or pretend the situation was normal. Instead, he said something that unraveled the last bit of fear tangled inside me. "You handled yourself with dignity today. And I want you to know that we see far more potential in you than your environment has allowed you to recognize." His words struck something deep in my chest, something that felt almost painful in how unfamiliar it was. I was quiet long enough that he continued, "We have employees who come from situations like yours, places where their confidence was slowly dismantled. Our company's standard isn't just hiring talent. It's supporting it." His sincerity pressed against every bruise my parents had left on my self-worth. "I appreciate that," I whispered, though the words felt too small for the tidal wave of emotion inside me. He paused, then said, "Your parents' behavior today was deeply inappropriate. But I want to be very clear. Their actions reflect nothing about your character or capability. Your resilience today told us more than their words ever could." My throat tightened painfully. No one had ever said something like that to me. Certainly not someone in authority. Certainly not someone who had every reason to dismiss me after witnessing what happened. When I didn't respond, he softened his tone. "You deserve a chance to build a life that isn't held hostage by other people's fears or insecurities. We'd like to be part of that process." A tear slipped down my cheek again, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you," I said. I didn't expect this. I thought everything was ruined." He hummed sympathetically. "Most people would have fallen apart," he replied. "But you didn't. And that stood out to all of us." After a breath, he continued, "I'll be leading your final round interview personally. It's mostly a conversation, nothing to worry about. We want to understand how we can support you, not test you." That sentence alone felt like someone lifting a weight off my shoulders I didn't even realize I had been carrying since childhood. But then he added something I wasn't prepared for. something that changed the tone of the conversation entirely. "Before we finalize your relocation package," he said carefully, "I need to ask a more serious question. Do you want help leaving your current home situation permanently?" My breath froze. No one had ever asked me that. Not a teacher. Not a friend. Not a relative. Everyone assumed that living at home meant stability, support, or at worst, annoyance. No one saw the invisible chains woven into everyday conversations, passive-aggressive remarks, and subtle psychological pressure. But he saw it. He saw all of it. And he wasn't asking out of curiosity, he was offering an exit. "Yes," I said, the words slipping out before I could overthink it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Honest. Final. The moment the word left my mouth, I felt something unfamiliar roll through me. Freedom, small but undeniable. "Good," he said gently. "Then we'll make sure you have everything you need to start fresh." By the time the call ended, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that my life was about to change in ways I had once believed were impossible. I stared at the silent phone, then at the dark hallway where my parents were still talking, still laughing, still unaware that they had just lost their grip on me completely. I took a long breath and whispered to myself, "I'm leaving." Saying it aloud made it real, and the truth of it filled me with a sense of power I had never felt before. For the first time in years, the future didn't terrify me. It welcomed me. Called to me. And this time I was finally ready to answer. If you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories.